After Superman 4: The Quest for Peace, the Man of Steel took a break from the big screen. The film was a box office bomb and was bashed by fans and critics. His appearances were changed to the small screen, with shows like Lois and Clark and his own animated series. During the 90s, he remained out of theaters while other comic book movies seemed to only drop more and more in quality and popularity. It was looking pretty rough until success of movies like Blade, X-Men, and Spider-Man started to shine a light in the genre again, each even having equally successful sequels in the early 2000s. Warner Bros. Let Christopher Nolan give his grounded and realistic take on Batman, which garnered success. With the genre seemingly making a comeback, give it a few bad apples here and there, it seemed like the perfect time to bring the most iconic superhero back to cinemas. And after a nearly 2-decade hiatus, Superman Returns hit theaters in 2006, and it was okay, I guess. A while ago, I asked you guys what you thought of this movie, and I kept seeing the same 3 words: slow, boring, and safe. And that is a very accurate way to sum up the movie. I want to take you guys through what I think the biggest problems are that this movie suffers from, and why it didn't resonate with many fans, resulting in them shelving the character again until 2013. I will point out here that I don't hate this movie. In fact, there are parts that I enjoy. The visual effects are still pretty decent 15 years later, and there are some really awesome action set pieces, and this scene is one of my favorites in the whole movie.
What do you hear?
Nothing.
I hear everything. You wrote that the world doesn't need a savior. But every day I hear people crying for one.
And Kevin Spacey is great as Lex Luthor.
Who is that boy's father?
Stay away from that kid, Spacey.
You didn't really think I was going to miss the opportunity to wish you a Merry Christmas, did you?
But this movie is plagued with several other issues that keep it from being anything other than passable at best. And it starts with one of the words I kept seeing people say: safe.
That was the fat ass nut.
So Bryan Singer was the director, which seemed like a good idea considering he just directed 2 well-received X-Men movies. He stepped away from X-Men The Last Stand to work on Superman Returns, but ironically just like X-Men 3, it failed to deliver. The biggest issue is that this movie treats itself kind of like a sequel to Superman 1 and 2. It also tries to capture that same tone and feeling. You can tell us what they're going for from the intro credits to the final shot, and several things in between. Brandon Routh even looks very similar to Christopher Reeves. They have the same suit, the same villain, and even the same basic conflict from the first movie. Luthor has a real estate scheme that will kill lots of people and make him rich in the process. Nothing we haven't seen him do already. The score was done by John Ottman, who's done basically all the X-Men movies, but he incorporates some of the score from Superman's 1978 movie, which was done by John Williams. So when you combine all this together, you get a very familiar and so-so experience. What the character really needed was an actual reboot, and not a continuation of 2 movies from 2 decades ago. Movies that already had continuations. I imagine that older audiences at the time who saw the first 2 Superman movies when they were younger probably did enjoy seeing basically an updated retrain with better visuals. But many more weren't that impressed with this old school feeling superhero flick. Spider-Man 2, X-Men 2, and Batman Begins came out right before this, and by comparison, Superman Returns comes off as bland. And yes, it was different from the other comic book movies at that time, but it was also very similar to comic book movies from 2 decades prior. It's crazy to think that Warner Bros. Would let Christopher Nolan do a grounded, realistic take on Batman, vastly different from what came before, and release it a year before this. But when rebooting Superman, they would just play it safe by trying to harken back to Richard Donner's films. There were a few interesting ideas, like Lois Lane trying to move on from Superman, and Lois Lane actually having Superman's son. Pretty neat ideas, but ultimately fail in the end, because of reasons we'll get to soon. Though playing it safe and reusing old ideas is the biggest issue that many have with this movie, there are quite a few other things that don't work that well either and bring down the whole experience. Brandon Routh looks pretty good as Superman. He definitely looks the part, especially since they were trying to get someone that resembled Christopher Reeves as much as possible. But he's pretty wooden in this movie. He has this very blank expression on his face, not showing much emotion, and he delivers his lines very monotone. And thanks to the film, he comes off as very creepy, mainly because he spies on Lois and her family with his X-ray vision. Thanks, movie. That's not weird at all. This isn't to say he's a bad actor, he's just a very bland and boring one, and isn't a standout in this movie, which is bad because he's the star of the movie. You would think that since this is loosely based on Richard Donner's continuity, and he's supposed to be the same Superman from those movies, that he would act more like Christopher Reeves. You see, when Christopher Reeves was being Clark Kent, he acted more like a small town doofus. He had small mannerisms that would help his disguise. It was more than just putting on some glasses. He acted different as Clark than he did when he was Superman. In Superman Returns, they don't try to carry that over, and instead he's a plank of wood as Clark and Superman. And the same thing can be said about most of the other characters too, besides Lex Luthor. He's the most entertaining part of the whole thing. Take Lois Lane. Not only is she just as wooden, her and Clark don't have any chemistry. I find it hard to believe that these two were were ever romantically involved, which makes you not as interested in their relationship, which isn't good because a big part of this movie is their relationship. You have Clark missing Lois, and Lois not being fully over Superman, but she's engaged to somebody else and has a kid now. Oh, and it turns out that the kid is actually superpowered because it's actually Superman's kid. That seemed interesting, but since I don't care about the parents, why would I care about the kid? Even the side characters are bland. Perry White has no energy. He doesn't have to have J.K. Simmons level of charisma.
Could you pay me in advance?
You are a worthless, friendless, faggot-lipped little piece of shit.
But look at the scene and try to tell me he doesn't come across as bored.
Politics, does he still stand for truth, justice, all that stuff, lifestyle? Superman returns. Come on, go.
And you got the side dick Richard White as Lois's new man, and he's nothing remarkable either. So with these characters being so uninteresting, it makes the movie feel boring because it's hard to get invested. Most of the movie is just these characters talking and interacting with each other, with very little action to break it up. And since they all come across as boring, dull, and wooden with no chemistry, you start to tune out, making the film a drag. And like I already said, there aren't many action scenes here to break up these long, mundane sections of uninteresting people talking. So yeah, the characters are boring.
What a fucking...
Nice action set piece. Shame the rest of the movie isn't like this. The action scenes for the most part are pretty good. The effects in CG don't look as dated as you might expect, and they're pretty fun. Except there are a few problems with them. First, there's not many, with long breaks in between, with most of the runtime just being boring characters and their melodrama. Second, some of these sequences take too long to set up. There's a lot of exposition and setup for these scenes that we don't need. Like this airplane scene, for example. The flight attendant explains to all the passengers what's going to happen, and we're just waiting for it to go wrong, so that Superman can come in and save the day. But we end up seeing the conversation between the pilots and Houston, Lex Luthor tests out his crystal, Clark drinking with Jimmy, and then when things finally go wrong, we also get to see the Daily Planet's reaction to it, and then we see Superman swoop in and save the day. It's a needlessly long build-up before you get to the action, when they could have cut out several bits and it would have been better paced. This whole airplane sequence takes over 11 minutes, and more than half of that is just a setup. When it finally happens, it's great, just getting there takes forever. Another example would be the robbers right here. You see them run to the roof, load up the helicopter, you see the cops pull up and surround the building, it keeps cutting away the cops sneaking up the stairwell, the robber starts blowing up cars with his minigun, and then you see Superman fly in and get an awesome shot of bullets bounces off of him. Again, you could trim out several things and it could work better. You can really shave these scenes down by taking out the little things that don't matter. I know it seems like a weird complaint, but I guess it's because the movie feels like such a drag with its uninteresting characters, that I would rather it get right into the good parts of the action scenes, and get rid of most of the needless exposition and setup. This next one might come off as a major nitpick, but it's a complaint I've been seeing people make for years, and it's the fact that we don't see Superman throw a punch or get into a fight with another superpowered foe. With the advancements in technology and special effects since his last movie, people want to see Superman flying and get into intense, large-scale battles, since we have the power to do that now. We got him flying and he looks good while doing it, but we didn't get to see a superpowered fist fight. Instead, the climax is Superman getting beaten up by Luthor and his goons when he's weakened by kryptonite, then falling into the ocean, getting saved by Lois and her sidekick, lifting a giant island up and throwing it into space. This is a pretty weak climax to the movie. By this point, I was kind of tuned out and just waiting for the movie to end. So the action overall was lacking. Despite it being pretty cool when it finally happened, I was just so bored by the characters and uninteresting plot that I just didn't care.
I get it. You're having an image problem.
Don't be ridiculous. I'm Superman.
Yeah, exactly. You're fucking white bread. You're boring.
I think this movie reinforces that statement I've heard people say for years, and that's Superman is a boring hero. He's not, but by watching this movie, I see why someone would feel that way. It borrowed too much from Richard Donner's films, and even though they're pretty solid for their time, a retrain of those movies 2 decades later wasn't the right choice, especially if you're trying to introduce Superman to a new audience. It played it safe and came off as boring and bland, and the acting was wooden. It lacked action, and even though there were a few bright spots, the movie just isn't that memorable. At least to me anyway. So that's why I think of Superman Returns. What do you think about it? Leave a comment and let me know. I have seen several people say that they think it's actually underrated, which is definitely a unique take. I don't think it's terrible, I don't think it's bad, I just think it's very bland, boring, safe, and uninteresting. Thanks for watching, I'll catch you next time.
You're still here. It's over. Go home. Oh, you're expecting a teaser.